week did not arrive like a tragedy. It arrived like laundry. One more thing, then another, then another. And by the time I understood I was drowning, all the water looked domestic. My daughter got sick first. Not movie sick. Not the kind that gives you one dramatic ambulance ride and a clean story to tell later. She got the kind of sick that steals sleep in teaspoons. The kind that turns every towel into a triage station. The kind that makes the house smell faintly of medicine, damp pajamas, and panic trying to stay polite. It started with a fever on Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, it had become an ear infection so angry the pediatrician spoke in that low practical voice doctors use when they know parents are already running on fumes. The antibiotics helped one problem and created three more. Her stomach revolted, her skin turned raw. Every diaper change became a rinse, a fresh towel, a new apology from me to a little person too young to understand why the cure also hurt. I missed 4 days of work. Not because I had options, but because one of us had to be the adult standing closest to the fire. In our house, that has almost always been me. Not because I earn less. I do not. Not because I worry more, though I probably do, but because somewhere along the years, without a meeting, without a vote, without even a fight worthy of remembering, I became the person emergencies belong to. My husband Dean likes to describe me as good in a crisis. People hear that and think it sounds like praise. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is just a prettier way to say, I have grown comfortable watching you carry what I postpone. While our daughter was sick, Dean's truck finally became the problem I had been predicting for nearly a year. One mirror had been half hanging since a parking lot scrape the previous autumn. His registration had been overdue long enough to become part of the background, like dust on a shelf everyone stopped seeing. I mentioned it in the soft ways wives mention the same thing 5 different times, because they would prefer partnership to parenting. Have you had a chance to call about that? Did you want me to put the registration notice by your keys? Do you think you should handle that before you get pulled over? Each time, I received some variation of later. Later became eventually. Eventually became never. Then never became a flashing light, a tow truck, and a phone call from his father asking me where the title was. It was not my truck. My name was not on the title. I had not owned it before I met him. Yet somehow, on the day it all blew up, I was the nearest available woman, and therefore the nearest imaginary filing cabinet. I remember standing in the kitchen with one hand on the counter, listening to his father say, "Well, do you know where the paperwork might be?" And thinking, what a remarkable system this is. A man ignores a problem for months, another man loses the document, and I become customer support for both of them. Dean came home furious, but not with himself. That would have required precision. He was furious in the broad, smoky way some people get when responsibility threatens to land on their actual address. He paced. He cursed the city. He cursed the impound fees. He cursed bad timing, as though timing had broken his mirror and hidden his registration on purpose. He said, "I just cannot deal with one more thing right now." I nearly laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I had been dealing with everything right now for days, and no one had written me an exemption note. We had already been talking about getting a larger vehicle before the baby came. I'm pregnant again, which makes every logistical problem feel like it is arriving with backup. So Dean decided that losing access to his truck was suddenly the perfect opportunity to buy something newer. I did not have the energy to argue sequence or wisdom or money. I just wanted enough moving pieces to keep our week from grinding into place around us. So a second vehicle entered the story before the first one had even properly left it. That should have helped. In a healthy house, it might have. But new solutions do not fix old habits. They just reveal them with better lighting. Because Dean's truck was trapped in impound, we had to switch the child seat back and forth between my car and the new one, depending on who had our daughter that day. This meant a tiny task became a sacred task. A task that could not be half done, forgotten, or shrugged at. A task tied to schedules, school drop-off, my job, his job, and the increasingly fragile illusion that adults were in charge here. Then our dog got sick. Of course she did. That is how bad weeks work. They do not knock once and wait. They try the back door while you are already opening the front. Mara stopped eating on Friday. By evening, she was vomiting in frightened little bursts. then standing with that miserable stillness animals get when they are trying not to ask for help too loudly. The emergency vet became our next address, and the next several $100s became our next disappearing act. By the end of the weekend, a blockage had finally passed. Mara would recover, and our savings account looked like someone had opened a window in it. When I said, "At least she's okay," Dean exhaled in that long, theatrical way he does when he wants his suffering acknowledged before anyone else's relief is allowed in the room. He stared at the receipt and said, "Yeah, well, there goes the month." I asked what alternative he preferred. Watch her worsen? Wait until the bill became even larger? Put down a healthy dog because the timing was inconvenient? He did not answer that directly. People rarely do. When sarcasm was carrying an argument, reason could not. He only said, "No, go ahead, do whatever you want." That sentence stayed with me all weekend. Do whatever you want. As if paying to keep an animal alive had been my indulgence. As if I had spent the money on throw pillows and not bile-stained towels and x-rays. As if every crisis in our home arrived wearing my fingerprints. By Sunday, I was moving through the house like someone trying to keep dishes from sliding off a shelf during an earthquake. Gentle, fast, and already tired in tomorrow's voice. That was when my car started jerking between gears. One hard pull, then another. The kind of mechanical refusal that makes your stomach drop because you know a machine is about to become a bill. I took it to a local shop first thing, Monday morning. After arranging a sequence of childcare favors and rides that looked less like a plan and more like a military map, the mechanic kept me for hours in a vinyl chair that made every pregnant inch of my back feel insulted. 3 hours later, a man with sympathetic eyebrows told me they could not actually do transmission work at that location. They had changed the oil. They had checked a few things. They had, in effect, held me hostage long enough for the rest of the day to spoil, then returned the car with its problem intact. I called Dean from the parking lot. I was hot, hungry, and so overwhelmed I could feel tears gathering the way storms gather behind mountains before anyone below can see them. I told him the car was still broken. I told him we needed a new plan for Monday. I told him I did not know how both of us were supposed to get to work, get our daughter where she needed to go, and get the car to the dealership that actually handled transmissions. He said, "Damn, okay, that was all." No. Let's think. No. I'll leave early and fix the seat. No. What do you need from me? Just 2 syllables and an exit. The verbal equivalent of handing me a cardboard box labeled problem and walking away before I could refuse it. I snapped. Not loudly. Exhaustion does not always scream. Sometimes it becomes very clear. I said if he was not going to help me solve this, I would call my father and figure it out myself. He said something clipped about being at work, as if I had phoned to gossip, not because the floor plan of our week had collapsed again. So I called my dad. And because fathers who have watched their daughters overfunction for years can hear a crack before it becomes visible, he said, "Come here, we'll sort it out." At my parents' house, we rebuilt Monday from scratch. It was absurdly complicated, which is often how family survival looks from the outside. I would drop our daughter at my parents' place before dawn, because they already help with school coverage on certain weekdays. I would drive the failing car to work. My dad would take that same car to the dealership from the school lot. Dean would use his lunch break to pick my father up after the drop-off. My mother would collect me and our daughter later, if the repair ran long. Every minute had an owner. Every seat had a purpose. Every handoff required the child's seat to be moved into the new car the night before. I told Dean all of this, slowly, twice, then once again by text. Move the child's seat before bed. That was the hinge the whole day swung on. I even pictured it while brushing my teeth. That black seat with the faded cup holder, locked into place, ready. I went to sleep trusting one simple task had been handled. It seems embarrassing now how much faith I placed in something so small. But marriages are made or unmade in exactly those places. Not grand betrayals at candlelit tables. Tiny acts of follow-through. The ordinary proof that someone heard you and treated your burden as real. I left before sunrise. The neighborhood was still blue with that early light that makes every parked car look temporary. My daughter was heavy against my shoulder, half asleep, her cheek warm on my neck. I opened the back door of the new car, reached in, and saw nothing. No child's seat, No straps, no buckles. Just empty upholstery where the whole plan was supposed to be waiting for us. People think rage feels hot. Sometimes it feels cold enough to sharpen. I stood there with my sleeping child in my arms, and in that one blank rectangle of leather, I saw the entire shape of my marriage for the past week. Not the sickness, not the bills, not the dog, not the towing yard. The emptiness. The assumption that I would catch what he dropped. The confidence that if he forgot, I would remember enough for both of us. I called him immediately. He answered groggy, already irritated by the existence of consequences. I said, "The seat is not in the car. You forgot to move it. The whole plan is blown." Without even pausing long enough to feel shame, he said, "Why didn't you remind me?" I do not know if there is a cleaner sentence for the death of romance than that one. Why didn't you remind me? Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I'll fix it." Not, "That's my fault." Just that familiar trick of administrative alchemy, turning his failure into my incomplete supervision. I had to call out of work. Again. No paid time left, no magic reserve of forgiveness from my employer, no way to teleport a child without a seat, and still arrive looking like a professional woman with a stable life. The repair appointment had to be juggled. My parents had to rearrange their day. Everything bent around one forgotten task, and somehow he still spoke to me as if I were the weak link in the chain. The rest of the day, I kept replaying the week and noticing details I had tried too hard not to notice in real time. His father calling me about paperwork that was never mine. Dean resenting the vet bill but not the neglect that made other bills unsurprising. Dean acting wounded whenever I needed more than a shrug. Dean treating my competence like a common resource, something available on demand and unworthy of gratitude. I realized stress had not transformed him into someone new. It had only removed the padding from habits I had spent years cushioning. That is the lie a lot of women tell themselves in decent marriages during bad seasons. He isn't like this. This is just stress. This is just money. This is just bad timing. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes a hard month drags the worst 5% of a person into daylight, and everyone deserves some grace. But grace is not the same thing as volunteering to become the shock absorber for someone else's irresponsibility. And stress is not an alibi for contempt. By evening, I was too tired to cry properly. The tears came the way leaks happen under old sinks, quiet, intermittent, and most visible only when the house goes still. My mother put my daughter in the bath while I sat at the kitchen table pretending to answer work emails. Really, I was looking at a blank screen and thinking about all the ways women get trained to confuse endurance with wisdom. How often we are told the noble version of love is staying soft while someone else stays careless. How frequently "he's under pressure" becomes a prayer we chant over our own resentment until it hardens into resignation. When I got home, Dean was already defensive. That told me everything. People who know they were wrong often arrive with repair. People who intend to escape it arrive with attitude. He started talking before I had even set down my bag. About work. About how stressed he was. About how everyone was piling things on him. About how I was coming at him when he was doing his best. I listened longer than I wanted to, partly because I was too tired to interrupt, and partly because I needed to hear whether accountability would appear if I gave it enough room. It did not. His best, apparently, looked a lot like my labor plus his complaints. So for the first time all week, I did not argue details. I did not recite the timeline. I did not defend why a dog deserved treatment, or why a title he misplaced was not hidden in my body, or why a missing child seat matters in the real world. I only said, I can survive a hard week. What I cannot survive is being blamed for everything hard that happens in it. He stared at me like I had changed the language of the room. Maybe I had. Maybe that is what boundaries are at first. A new dialect in a house that has grown lazy with translation. I told him I wanted counseling. Not as a threat. Not as theater. As infrastructure. Because if stress reveals this version of us, then we do not have a logistics problem. We have a partnership problem. And I am done donating my nervous system to keep it disguised. He said I was overreacting. Of course he did. That is often the final privilege of the person doing less. Getting to judge the emotional tone of the person carrying more. But something in me had become very still by then. Not numb, not hopeless, just clear. The kind of clear that comes when your body gets to the truth a few minutes before your pride does. I looked at him and thought, number. Overreacting would have been screaming in the driveway at dawn. Overreacting would have been throwing every unpaid receipt onto the floor and letting him sort our life from the confetti. Overreacting would have been pretending this was about a seat, or a truck, or a dog, or one ugly week. This was about the pattern beneath all of it. The reflex that made him reach for blame faster than repair. The habit of treating my reliability as both expected and invisible. The quiet arrogance of asking a woman to be the emergency plan, the backup plan, the memory, the chauffeur, the scheduler, the softer parent, and then the villain when one gear slips. That night, after everyone was finally asleep, I stood in the hallway and looked at the child seat where I had placed it myself for the next morning. The straps lay flat. The latch clicked correctly. Ready. Because I had made it ready. Again. And for once, that did not make me feel capable. It made me feel warned. Because a marriage cannot survive forever on one person's ability to compensate. Eventually, competence becomes camouflage. It hides the rot so well that even the woman doing all the holding begins to wonder whether the structure is sound. I am still here. I am still trying. I am still hoping counseling can pull us back towards something more equal, more honest, more adult. But I no longer mistake my endurance for proof that this dynamic is acceptable. The week everything went wrong did not teach me that life is fragile. I already knew that. Children get sick. Animals swallow things. Cars fail. Paychecks vanish into repairs and medicine. Any grown woman learns that early. What the week taught me was harder. It taught me that hardship does not only reveal what a family is up against, it reveals who in that family expects to be carried and who has been carrying too much for too long.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.